Good evening. I, Dr. Aarti Heda, welcome you all on behalf of Team Surfing the Anterior segment to the session 7th. With the goal of providing a direction to the professional careers of next generation, YOSI has become the voice of young ophthalmologists. Surfing the Anterior segment is a case and a video-based webinar series initiated by YOSI. We aim to discuss and understand the complexities of managing an ophthalmic case and providing fresh perspective to the approach. So before we start this session, let's recap our journey of last 6 sessions. We started this series in May 2020, and we have covered topics like Stevens-Johnson syndrome, DRS, trabeculectomy, iris claw lenses, OSSN in previous sessions. And today we have our 7th session. So let me introduce you to my co-moderator for the session today, Dr. Sonal Kalia. She is working as an assistant professor in Department of Ophthalmology, SMS Medical College, Jaipur. She is Vice President of Young Ophthalmologist Society of India. So welcome, Sonal, and over to you.
I wish Dr. Aarti Heda for including me in today's session. Viewers, you all know Dr. Aarti as a regular in Surfing the Anterior Segment YOSI series, but you may not know that she had a very successful stint as anterior segment and glaucoma surgeon in Africa for a period of about 4 years. She's a prolific anterior segment and glaucoma surgeon. To her credit, she also returned back to her motherland and is currently working at KKI Institute, Pune. Her personality is very affable and inspiring person to know on a personal level. I'm glad to be a part of this event with her. And now, on behalf of Young Ophthalmologist Society of India, I wish to extend a warm welcome to Professor Sushmita Kaushik ma'am from PGI Chandigarh. We are extremely grateful to her for accepting our kind invite to guide budding eye surgeons about congenital glaucoma today. Her expertise in glaucoma, especially in pediatric glaucoma, has made her an internationally renowned personality. Team Yossi cannot do justice to her CV that is replete with her accomplishments and runs over 50 pages. But apart from being the founder secretary of Indian Pediatric Glaucoma Society, IPGS, she has multitude of awards and numerous publications to her credit. It would suffice to say that we would try our best to learn from her and to play our tiny role in her mission or her quest to treat every congenital glaucoma child with the care that she so desires and teaches all of us. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. Over to you, Aarti.
Yeah. So let me introduce other panelists for the session today. So we have today with us Dr. Mainak, who is working as a consultant with IQ and Max Group of Hospital. Then we have Dr. Tamonash, who will be presenting a case on congenital glaucoma. He is currently working as an associate consultant at Shankar Nethralaya, Kolkata. Then we have Dr. Monica, who is working currently as a senior resident in glaucoma and squint and neuro-ophthalmology services at RP Center. So over to you, Dr. Monica, for your presentation. So Dr. Monica will be giving us an introduction to the congenital glaucoma.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aarti. First of all, I would like to thanks all the EOC members for giving me this wonderful opportunity for interacting with the great panelists and with the pioneer of glaucoma, Dr. Sushmita Kaushik ma'am. In this slide, I'm going to give an overview of what congenital glaucoma is. So to begin with, congenital glaucoma is basically a subset of childhood glaucomas, which is characterized by a group of disorders in which there is improper development of the eye's aqueous outflow system, and it manifests in infancy and childhood. So the congenital glaucoma is the various classification systems have been put forth. One includes Schaffer-Weiss classification system, in which they classify glaucoma.
Sorry for the interruption, Dr. Monica. Can you please start
slide shares.
Screen share?
Yeah, screen share.
Is it not? Is not working?
Yeah.
Just a minute.
You could do it again, please. Thank you so much.
Is it visible now?
Yes, it's visible now.
Sorry for the inconvenience.
You can just put it on the, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for telling that. So in this session, I'll be talking about congenital glaucoma. So congenital glaucoma is a subset of childhood glaucoma, which is characterized by improper development of eye's aqueous outflow system that manifest in infancy and childhood. Various classification systems have been put forth. The one includes Schaffer-Weiss classification system, which classifies congenital glaucoma into isolated congenital anomaly, glaucoma with ocular anomalies, and acquired glaucomas. The Hoskin anatomical classification classifies them into a goniodysgenesis, trabecular dysgenesis, iridodysgenesis, and corneodysgenesis. Coming on to one of the important classification which is currently in vogue is of Childhood Glaucoma Research Network Classification System. So here we need to look at the following parameters. This classification classifies glaucoma into confirmed glaucoma and glaucoma suspect. So we have intraocular pressure of more than 21 millimeters of mercury, the optic nerve with increasing cup-disc ratio, increasing disc asymmetry with focal thinning. Cornea, in cornea, we can see harp striae or increasing corneal diameter. There could be myopic shift and increasing axial length and visual field defect corresponding to the nerve damage. So if two or more than two of these factors are present, then we need to look for whether the glaucoma is diagnosed only after the cataract surgery. If the answer to this question is yes, then this subset becomes glaucoma following the cataract surgery. The cataract could be either in congenital idiopathic cataract or associated with ocular or systemic conditions or an acquired cataract. Then depending upon the extent of visualization of the pigmented trabecular meshwork, if the PTM is visible for more than 180 degree, it could be an open angle glaucoma, or otherwise it becomes an angle closure glaucoma. However, if the answer to the first question is no, the next thing we need to look for is the presence of a congenital eye anomaly or any systemic syndrome. If a systemic syndrome is present, it becomes glaucoma associated with non-acquired systemic syndrome. And if no systemic syndrome is present, only congenital ocular anomaly is present, then it becomes glaucoma associated with non-acquired ocular anomaly. Both of these can further be classified into open angle or an angle closure glaucoma. Now, if no such history is present, then we need to look for a history of any trauma, uveitis, steroid use, any tumor, ROP or others. If any one of this is present, it becomes glaucoma associated with acquired condition. However, if none of this is present, then we need to look for the presence of ophthalmos. If no ophthalmos is there, it becomes a juvenile open angle glaucoma. And if ophthalmos is present, it becomes a primary congenital glaucoma. However, if in any one of these factors is present or the intraocular pressure is more than 21 on two separate occasions, then we count the patient as having a glaucoma suspect. Now we're going to talk a little bit about primary congenital glaucoma. So primary congenital glaucoma can be classified into a neonatal glaucoma, which is described as right from birth to 1 month of age, or infantile glaucoma from 1 month to 2 years, and a late onset primary congenital glaucoma with an onset after 2 years of age. The incidence of primary congenital glaucoma is ranges from 1 in every 10,000 to 15,000 live births, with being even as high as 1 in 1,200 live births in Middle East countries because of increased consanguinity in these countries. In 75% of the cases, it is bilateral, and 60% of the patients are usually male. Around 75% of the cases present within 1 year of the onset of the disease. Talking about the genetics, so most of these cases are sporadic in nature. Those which are inherited have autosomal recessive inheritance with very high penetrance, and the genetic loci include a GLC3A to D loci. The GLC3A loci harbors the CYP1B1 gene, which is involved in the steroid metabolism, and the GLC3C loci involves the LTBP2 gene, and these are abnormal in PCG. Talking about pathogenesis, various theories have been put forth, but one of the most accepted theories states that there is a developmental arrest of the anterior chamber angle tissue, which leads to the anterior insertion of the iris and the ciliary body, compressing the trabecular beams, leading to an outflow obstruction. Talking about the clinical features, so this is a classic triad which has photophobia, lacrimation, and blepharospasm, which happens because of corneal edema. Now, how does the corneal edema happens? There is increase in the intraocular pressure, which leads to enlargement of the eyeball, leading to stretching of the cornea, causing breaks in the descendant membrane, leading to endothelial barrier disruption and subsequently the edema. If the increase in intraocular pressure and edema persist, it leads to scarring and subsequently a corneal opacity. Talking about the signs, so the signs would be ophthalmos, which is an ox eye, a large eye leading to axial myopia as well. Enlarged corneal diameters would be there along with corneal edema. The harp stria, which are because of the breaks in the decimate membrane. If they're present alongside the margin of the limbus, they're concentric, and if they're present in center, they're usually horizontal. Then there could be thin corneas, corneal scarring, and glaucomatous optic neuropathy. Now, talking about investigations, as children are very difficult to examine, so they require an examination under anesthesia. So we need to measure the intraocular pressure, which is done by Perkins, or the other tonometers like tonopen, rebound tonometer, pneumotonometer can also be used. Now, since the intraocular pressure gets affected by the anesthetic agent, so it should be measured as soon as the patient gets intubated. Apart from that, the corneal diameters are measured. Ophthalmoscopic examination for the disc evaluation should be done, and a direct gonioscopy can be done to view the angle and thus tailor the surgical management. Apart from that, an ultrasound scan to look for a posterior segment pathology, particularly when there is a corneal opacity, and to document an axial length is important. Cycloplegic refraction is also another important component because of the axial myopia, which can lead to amblyopia if not looked at. And in cooperative patient, we can assess the visual acuity along with a visual field examination if the child is around 7 to 8 years of age. Now, not every large eye with large cornea would be a congenital glaucoma, whereas differentials would be there. So the cloudy cornea can happen following trauma in mucopolysaccharidosis, endothelial dystrophy. Large cornea can be seen in megalocornea, sclerocornea, or high myopia. Lacrimation can happen in nasolacrimal duct obstruction, epithelial dystrophies, and abrasions. Photophobia can be seen in keratitis and uveitis, and the optic disc anomalies that can mimic glaucomatous neuropathy include any colobomas, hypoplastic disc, or tilted disc. Talking about the treatment, so we have a medical option and surgical options. The medical option usually acts as a bridging therapy to surgical treatment because the angle is not well formed, and hence the surgical treatment is the mainstay of treatment. So in the medical management, we have beta blockers, topical and oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, prostaglandin analogs, and cholinergic agonists. In the surgical treatment, we have options of goniotomy, trabeculotomy, trabeculectomy, and combined trabeculotomy and trabeculectomy. So this is just an overview of the treatment options. The details of this shall be discussed further in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monica, for that wonderful presentation. Can I request you to stop the screen share?
Yeah, I have stopped it.
I now request Dr. Tamonash to present his case on congenital glaucoma. So by the time we are getting ready, let me just remind our audience put their question in the chat box, and we will take up all the questions at the end of all the presentations.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, your presentation is visible, Dr. Tamonash.
Very good evening to everyone. I thank Yossi to give me the opportunity to present in this platform here. So what I will be presenting is a video-based, like a video of an interesting case of a refractory glaucoma, which was managed by glaucoma drainage device. So my job is already made easier by Dr. Monica, as she has described the studies and everything like we do in primary congenital glaucoma. So we are now sure that primary congenital glaucoma requires a surgical management. And in refractory cases, the glaucoma drainage device has a leading role. The retrospective studies suggest that the AGV in children, Ahmed glaucoma valve in children are successful, and they reduce the IOP by 28 to 49%. So coming to the case I am presenting, a 6-year-old special child presented to us with a history of watering of both eyes, along with whitening of the front part of the eye. The kid was diagnosed to have a primary congenital glaucoma, and she underwent trabeculotomy, external trabeculotomy plus trabeculectomy, and later repeat trabeculectomy with mitomycin C also in both the eyes. The baby was a preterm born, and had a stay in ICU after 7 days. So the baby can't speak actually. According to the mother, the main complaint was reduced mobility of the child during the last 6 months. So currently the patient was on dorzolamide and timolol combination twice daily and bimatoprost at night once in both the eyes. So with this history, we planned examination under anesthesia. We saw there is a shallow bleb superiorly along with a corneal scar and half stria in both eyes with stretched limbus. The corneal diameter was around 14 into 14 in both the eyes. The pachymetry was 454 and 471 respectively. The axial length was 23.25 in right eye and 22.24 in left eye. IOP with intraocular pressure with Perkins was 24 millimeter of mercury in the right eye and 34 millimeter of mercury in the left eye, which was corroborated with the tonopen also. And there was two superior peripheral iridectomy noted in both the eyes. The lens was clear and there was almost near total cupping with attached retina. So this history, we planned a glaucoma drainage device. I'll play it in a separate window because it won't play in full screen. Sorry for the inconvenience. Is the video visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Visible.
Thank you. So this is the case. We can see two broad peripheral iridectomy superiorly, and there is a scarred conjunctiva in the superior portion because of the previous surgeries. There was corneal scar also. So I'm searching for mobile conjunctiva in the superior temporal quadrant. So if I'm satisfied, I got satisfied that that part was mobile. So I took a corneal traction suture. If the conjunctiva was not mobile in this part, I would have done in the infratemporal quadrant. So around 4 mm from the limbus, I start doing the peritomy. Adequate peritomy has to be done for the placement of the tube, and we have to do a meticulous dissection of the tenons from the sclera, and we have to make a pocket in the superiotemporal region for the placement of the implant. I'm taking a tenotomy scissor and I am doing a meticulous dissection here of the tenons from the underlying sclera. So this pocket is made. This is important. So minimal cautery is done. We can't do a excessive cautery because of the thinned out sclera. This is an important part. This is a FP7 implant. I'm doing a priming. See the jet of fluid coming out of here. This is required first, and now I'm placing the implant in the superiotemporal portion where I created the pocket. First we have to around 8 to 10 mm behind the 8 mm behind the limbus. I am fixing the sclera, fixing the implant with the sclera. One partial thickness suture with 10-0 nylon is passed, and that is passed through the hole also. And in this case, if the conjunctiva above is hampering the muscle hook actually to retract the conjunctiva gently for the better visualization. So I'm doing that. This is the muscle hook. So we have to fix the plate here around 8 mm behind the limbus. So after it is fixed, we have to adequate amount of length of tube is trimmed with a beveled up position. Around 30 to 45 degree bevel up is created. And we have to keep a little longer tube in the anterior chamber in this sort of cases because the globe enlarges in kids. So around 3.5 mm behind the limbus, I am doing a stab entry with a small scleral tunnel with 23 gauge needle. And I am putting the tube inside with a special forceps. And just look here, I am keeping the tube a little lengthy in this case. So I'm checking the fluid, whether there is any leak around the tube or not. And I'm just anchoring the tube with 10-0 nylon suture. This suture did not have to be very tight. It just have to be anchoring the tube in the place. And generally, I take corneal tissue to cover the tube. But during this period, we had a scarcity of the corneal tissue. So I took scleral graft to cover the tube. Actually, scleral graft is a little bit tough to penetrate through this 10-0 nylon suture needles. So you can see I struggled a bit to pass the sutures through that scleral patch graft. My assistant hold one part of the graft, then only I could pass. So what I did is I did a staged sort of. I took a partial thickness scleral bite once, and then again I passed it through the scleral graft. And we have to trim the scleral graft adequately to properly cover the tube of the implant. So this is fixed with a 10-0 nylon to the sclera. And we have to trim it accordingly so that the conjunctival frill here, which covers the scleral graft adequately. And now I'm closing the conjunctiva. What I do generally with 8-0 Vicryl, I take 2 interrupted sutures here where I have given the back cuts. First, I take 2 sutures here, then I close the conjunctiva with the continuous suture through that 8-0 Vicryl only. Before closing the conjunctiva, we have to always check whether the tube is in correct position or not. It should be away from the cornea. There should not be any tube corneal touch, and mostly parallel to the iris. And that has to be checked before this conjunctival closure and all. And if something like that is there, then we have to replace the tube or actually modulate. So I'm covering, I'm closing the conjunctiva. And this suture has to be watertight. So I'll be checking the whether there is any leak or not. This is about the case. So coming back to the presentation. So we did that surgery, and after around 1.5 months, we did a second examination under anesthesia, and we found out that there was a nice hyperemic bleb in the superior temporal quadrant, and there was a deep AC with tube inside the AC without any tube corneal touch, and the intraocular pressure has reduced. It has come down to 18 mm of Hg with one anti-glaucoma medication, the beta blocker, and this is her refraction. So childhood glaucoma is a diagnostic and therapeutic challenge for glaucoma specialists, and it has been noted that around 20% of children with childhood glaucoma often require 2 or more glaucoma intervention. In this sort of cases, the glaucoma drainage device have a leading role for the management of congenital glaucoma, but it has some of challenges because there is a large cornea with the alternate anatomy and thinned out sclera, which poses a challenge. So I took this case for discussion. I would like ma'am's comment or any suggestion or any modification if she wants, or any other expert panel they want to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Damonaj, for that wonderful presentation. I'll congratulate you for this wonderful surgery. I have a question for you. You mentioned that the patient was operated twice before you did the surgery. So can you tell us when was it done? What was the gap between the diagnosis, the first surgery, the second surgery, and the third surgery?
The baby first presented at the age of 2 months. So the first surgery was done at around 2 months. And then the baby was all right, almost for 2.5 years. At the age of 3, she had a second surgery when the IOP was not controlled, and I did the surgery at 6 years of age. The child is currently at the age of the child is 6 years.
Okay, fine. Thank you. The other question is what? Sorry.
The second examination under anesthesia, we did the second eye glaucoma drainage device also.
Or the other eye. What post-op medications did you give to your patient?
Yeah, for these children, I give Predfort actually for around 2 months. Tapering dose, obviously. I give Toba for 1 week, 4 times, and anti-glaucoma aquosuppressant, the beta blocker. day one only I started.
Okay. So I understand that you saw the patient last, which was in October 2020. So when are you planning to see the patient next?
Like I did other eye surgery on that visit only. So I asked the patient to come back after 1.5 months. So the baby will be coming like around it's like December end or something, most probably.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sonal.
So after the complex surgical case so lucidly presented by Dr. Tamonash, it's the time, the much awaited time for the expert lecture on management of congenital glaucoma by Professor of Ophthalmology at PGI Chandigarh, Professor Sushmita Kaushik ma'am. She's an illuminating fountainhead of novel ideas in the field of glaucoma, and her energies have been mostly directed to caring for pediatric glaucoma. And we once again wish to thank her for her gracious presence today to comment upon this case and to summarize the management of congenital glaucoma for young eye surgeons to hopefully emulate someday. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Sonal and Aarti and everybody for having me. This is my favorite activity to give gyan to youngsters, but it also makes me feel very old. But anyway, so Tamanash, lovely case. I'm so happy that yeah, the young ophthalmologists are taking this on, because the usual tendency is to, just send them away and not take the onus on. So I'm very happy for that. And wonderful surgery as well. I must commend the skill with which it was put in. So just a few caveats. When doing AGVs, we've seen that AGVs or the valved implants in the young are wrought with problems later, because they tend to have very large capsules around the episcleral plates. And we've struggled and struggled with them. So having said that, most people around the world who are dealing with childhood glaucoma would prefer a non-valved implant in that, because we think it is because there is so much of exuberant inflammatory response in children, and ligating a non-valved implant in the first 6 weeks gives time for the anterior chamber inflammation to subside. So finally, when the aqueous goes out at 6 weeks, or whenever the vitreal has dissolved, that aqueous is a lot less hot than it was with the AGV. That's one of the thoughts. The second thing is that the AGV is a little rough because of the valve, and the Barvelt, which is used worldwide, and in India we use the Adi, is much smoother. And the third thing is the wide area, right? So the fluid is spread out over a wider area than being concentrated in that area around the AGV, which causes a very encapsulated capsule. So before the Adi came in, we spent a lot of time in excising these capsules and doing all that, but they rarely ever worked. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Then regarding the surgery itself, Dr. Keith Barton, who maybe has done thousands and thousands and thousands of implants in his life. So he says now, over a period of time, especially for children, when you have to, tide them over the next 65, 70 years, that it is impossible that an implant in the eye close to the cornea is not going to cause endothelial decompensation. So he always says, and we've started emulating him, that the way to go is to put the tube as far away from the cornea as possible. And the way to do that is to let it scrape the iris. And he says, at the most, it's going to cause a little bit of hypopigmentation there, but so what? A little bit of depigmentation of iris far in the periphery is not going to hurt anybody. According to him, there is never any iritis because it is so inert, and he has never seen a CME. Those are theoretical concerns, but he says the offshoot of having it scraping the iris is being so sure that it's away from the cornea. So we've all traditionally heard that we need to put it midway in the angle. But as you know, when you're inserting, it's very difficult to know what midway in the angle is from the microscope. So maybe that's something to keep in mind, that it's better to go a little lower. And the other thing that now Dr. George has just published a lovely paper in the AJO last month, in which he shows a patchless graft. So I'm not saying do a patchless graft, but what I'm saying is that technique that he uses of a little bit of a sinuous tube, which I've started doing. So the track is a little longer and he keeps it a little S-shaped on the scleral surface, because especially in children, when the eye, suppose it enlarges more, our problem is retraction and also a lot of movement. So it gives you a little play of the tube. It is next to impossible to put a tube extender and put it in. All of those are very theoretical things. But once the tube has retracted, you're in a real trouble. You either have to explant it or you need to put in a second tube or something like that. So just having a little bit. And I agree the scleral graft makes it a little difficult. I have now switched completely to a 9-0 nylon. And believe me, it is a wonderful suture. It's tougher, it doesn't break so much, and it's easier to put through the episclera and the scleral patch graft as well. So I used to do a lot of 10-0s, but the last couple of years I've switched to a 9-0 nylon, and that works very well. So those would be my little tiny bits on what I think was a very, very well done surgery. So should we go on, and should I share my screen now?
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead. We're waiting.
Yeah, okay. Right, I'll have to, sorry, it's somewhere in the middle. Okay. Right, so I hope that's visible now. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So, well, what is the problem with childhood glaucoma? When we talk about them, we know it's potentially blinding. And the problem with children is, unlike other glaucomas, our job doesn't end with IOP control. And at the end of the day, preserving their long-term vision is the real challenge. So the magnitude of childhood blindness due to glaucoma also is quite a bit. So we must know that the definition has changed to less than 3 by 60 in a child less than 16 years. And the prevalence is about 0.1 to 1.1 per 1,000 children in the world. And India is somewhere in between, so 0.5 per 1,000 children. Now, if you know the thousands and thousands of children that we have in India less than 16 years, 0.5 per 1,000 is quite a large number. So why bother? The main thing is, even though the absolute numbers may be less, but then it's the second largest cause of blind person years following cataract. Now, what is this blind person years? This is an important thing for all of us dealing with children, because this is the number blind into the number of years a person lives blind with the disease. So for a 70-year-old man to be blind with cataract for 1 year is 70 blind years. But for one child to be blind with glaucoma is 70 blind years. So for that one child. So that's the difference between them. And approximately 40% of all childhood blindness, unfortunately, is avoidable. And we could have made a difference if we'd acted in time. So it's poorly addressed, but worldwide recognized recently. Now we are proud we have an Indian Pediatric Glaucoma Society, which talks about these children quite a lot. And once you start working with them, there's virtually nothing that you can't do with them. So they sit on the slit lamps, they get their gonioscopies done, they do their fields. It's fun to work with them when they tell their visions, and they show their discs very smartly. And by the time they're 2 or 3 years old, they're very smart at the slit lamp as well. So since most of it has been covered, I thought we could go straight on to the management. We'll talk of surgery because that's the main stay for childhood glaucoma, and we'll emphasize on visual rehabilitation. So I can't specify enough the importance of clinical examination for children as well as for adults. This is your cornerstone. So once you do a detailed examination under the microscope, you must look for features like iris hypoplasia. This is a congenital ectropion uvea that we saw in a lot of these babies, and we've recently published this in the AJO as well this year. So, sorry. So look for these things, the congenital ectropion uvea, features of Axenfeld Rieger, aniridia, even through a pretty much hazy cornea through the microscope. If you look for it, you'll be able to see it. And why that's important is it makes a huge difference in the prognosis and what we're going to do further. Gonioscopy gives clues. You can do it with an indirect gonio lens, even if you're not doing gonio surgery, and you just need a direct lens for surgery alone. So the same gonioscope that you use in your clinic, you can just take it up to the OR, wash it with soap and water, and use it to look at the angle. So this is what a normal infantile angle looks like. So this is a normal child. There's a flat iris insertion. The ciliary body band is generally present if you look for it. And the stroma, though is not well formed, you might see the major arterial circle and some radial vascular arterial pillars because it takes time for the iris and the angle to develop. Now, the pathological angle is important to recognize because the cornea might be clear and the pressures might be so-called normal, but you might just see a dysgenetic angle and you might know that the other eye of a child whom you're operating requires surgery. So the angle doesn't recede normally. There are some mesodermal remnants which are present. There's high insertion of the iris and the trabecular meshwork is functionally abnormal. So this is what a type 1, this is what Dr. Sampaolisi has written in his book. And it's very, very useful if we do it. So now we routinely, it's part of our UA chart. A type 1 angle, you see some trabecular meshwork visible and the iris processes go up, but then there is some TM visible as well. And these angles are amenable to angle surgery. So this sort of an angle, I would go in and do a goniosurgery. Whereas a type 2 angle, you can see here, very severe goniodysgenesis, no trabecular meshwork visible, almost like a chronic angle closure. So if there's no TM visible, you can be pretty much sure that these are the guys who are going to do badly with goniosurgery, and it might be worthwhile to think of a combined trab with trab initially. The next thing after an angle is do try to take a look at the disc. And it is possible, we don't have a ret cam in the OR available all the time. So what we've started doing when we can see it is just use the centerpiece of the gonioscope and take a snapshot on the microscope camera. And that really, really helps because we have an idea on the follow-ups as to what the disc was like. So many times in children, you know that the eye is going to elongate, the pressures may not be high, the axial length is difficult to decide whether or not it is increasing or not. So a disc evaluation itself will tell you. Now, having said that, normal infants should not have a cup more than 0.3. There is no question of a small baby having a 0.6 cup and we calling it physiological. They don't have physiological cupping in glaucoma if it is more than 0.3. So I've put this chart here and you can see that the cup to disc ratio of 0.1 to 0.3 is in 87% and 0.4 to 0.5 in only 13% of normal eyes and nothing beyond that. So these were hundreds and hundreds of children taken from Hoskins data. No normal child had a cup to disc ratio which was greater than 0.5. So be very, very suspicious if you're looking for glaucoma. Acute eye drops, we all know if you do an early treatment, they clear without scars as well. So they usually, mothers are frantic because they've come in, 2 din pehle bilkul theek tha, and now he's become white, but you clear it in time, and this is just with 1 CTT and a goniotomy in the other eye, and a year later he's okay. So this is an acute emergency almost. It's due to an enlarged Harbs. So this is the Harbs striae which stretches with the stretching of the angle. And in this baby, this is what the UBM showed. So you can see this is the tear in the desme, which suddenly causes a rapid influx of aqueous into the stroma, causing the Harbs. So coming to what surgery to do, initially it varies. If you have a PCG or a non-acquired glaucoma, usually you would need to treat the angle because that is where the major insult is. It's a goniodysgenesis. So you either do a goniotomy, trabeculotomy, or a combined trab with trab, depending on how well you can see an angle. Whereas for acquired glaucomas in children, this is steroid induced, this is trauma. Usually you just do a trab with MMC. And angle surgery is usually not done because the angle is not dysgenetic. They need a filter. It's a trabecular meshwork, which is non-functional. So when the cornea is relatively clear, we do a goniotomy. It's ab interno. There's direct visualization of the angle through a surgical gonio lens, and we slice the non-functional trabecular meshwork. The logic is to provide a conduit of the aqueous to go out of the eye and bypass the non-functional trabecular meshwork. So these are some of the lenses. When we didn't know better, we bought all of them. And at the end of the road, we've seen that the Swan Jacob easily works best for us, but any surgical gonioscope can be used to do the surgery. So the microscope needs to be tilted and the eyepiece needs to be up. So this is how the light is going to go. You can see if the eye is straight here, the light is going to go straight up and you're not going to be able to see the angle. So you need to tilt the head so that the angle is straight in your view, and you need to tilt the microscope as well. So we do as much of goniotomy as possible. You can see these iris processes there, and we go beyond it because otherwise they tend to bleed. I'm using an MVR blade knife here, but it's also useful to use a 25 gauge needle on a syringe with viscoelastic, because then you can, the assistant can inject. So now I'll just pause it a minute. So we'll just take it back a bit. All right. So this is the untreated angle and this is the treated angle. And I want you to see when you slice it, you see how this iris just falls back. So it's like opening it up like a crocodile, right? A crocodile's mouth. And this aqueous then has an egress out through the Schlemms. So this is the back of the Schlemms canal. And this is the untreated angle. So as you go along, you'll be able to see the untreated angle. Now, sometimes it helps to go from cut to uncut area. So as we go along in a minute, so in one shot, it is possible to treat about 120 degrees. So you'll be able to do that without doing anything. But it's important to be able to treat as much of the angle as possible. So in a couple of moments, you'll see that there is a smart assistant who would rotate the eye. So your knife is still there and the eye is rotated such that you treat as much as is possible. Sometimes you might have a little bit of a bleed, but don't worry about them. Most of them just disappear next morning. So this is the 120 degrees treated, and then I'm going to replace it, and now you'll see the angle. So there's a bit of heme there, and now once the knife goes in again, and then I'm going to say rotate, and you'll just watch the eye. Should rotate now, yeah. So there it does, and you have some more untreated angle, which now you can access and you can treat. So we usually manage a little more than 180 degrees, almost 200 degrees. And the more you treat, possibly the better it will be. Right, so it's been an encouraging journey. This is an infantile onset PCG. This is where the garden variety of PCG where goniotomy works best. This child, this baby came at about 3 months and all she needed was one goniotomy in both eyes. And this is actually the other eye on the first post-op there when she really wanted to see us through the slit lamp. And sometimes you need two. So this infantile onset, of course, you can see this has much more. But sometimes, even though it looks very white, but on table, we could actually do the goniotomy. So this is this eye, and we manage a goniotomy. So sometimes under the microscope, you could do it. I've started becoming a little brave now. And when I admit them a couple of days before, especially for the COVID, now I've started giving them Diamox. The dose is 25 milligrams in 3 divided doses per kg body weight in 3 divided doses. So you give 25 milligram per kg in the whole day. And that also works to clear it a little bit. And mercifully, nothing happens. So you can see at the end of about a year and a half, both eyes are completely clear, and a second goniotomy works. Which is better? Well, there is one study where it was randomized. There was no significant difference in IOP control, but then the medications required in the goniotomy group was a little more than in the TRAB group. By the time you will, or in the next couple of years, what you will be doing for glaucoma surgery is going to be a lot of ab interno angle surgery. So I thought I'd put in, I borrowed this from Patrick, so a colleague in California. And this is a goniotomy assisted transluminal trabeculotomy, or GATT. So it uses a Prolene. It's inexpensive. I know most of us have the concern that MIGS or minimally invasive would be very, very um, expensive. But here, all you need is your skill of goniotomy, which you do in children, and the Prolene suture. So the Prolene suture goes in, and I thought it's nice to show a clip of that as well. And here is the goniotomy being done, which means that you slice the Schlemm's canal, open it up, and then through that same incision, you use a vitrectomy forceps. And this has been blunted by a bit of cautery, and you slowly thread it in. Easier said than done. I've had beginner's luck in the first 2 cases that I did, and after that, I couldn't cannulate it in the next 3. So that's not too good, 2 out of 5 so far. But yes, it does get a little bloody and messy. And then you just pull it out, and you can do a small IA or use Simcoe's cannula and finish off this bleed. So I think it will be very useful because it gives you a 360 degrees goniotomy, and this is going to work. They haven't called it a goniotomy, they've called it a gonioscopy assisted trabeculotomy, in fact. Right, so the primary results of 14 eyes of 10 patients with more than 1 year follow-up. Most studies have less than that. There's early post-op hyphema, which clears, and the mean IOP actually dropped from 27 to 14. So these were, of course, adult eyes. They were not children. So I'm sure our children will benefit very well. Of course, when the cornea is hazy, this is our workhorse surgery, the combined trab with trab. Here, the visible diameter was 16 mm, but we had a 3 millimeter limbus. So this is the anatomical limbus, and this is the surgical limbus. So it's important to know that the iris is not here. The iris is here, actually. This is where the root is. And once the trabeculotomy is done, we combine it. And actually what is going in, this is anterior chamber here. So this is where the iris root is. So you have to be very careful with these stretched limbuses. And once the trabeculotomy is done, and we follow it up, and all this gray zone there is trabecular tissue, which is cut, and then the PI is done. Right, so this is one in congenital ectropion UVA, and you see sometimes the tenons is thick. I could have cleared this a little bit, but sometimes, often we get lazy and we say, chalo, isko chodo. So I thought I'd just show you what a CEU look like. So this is very, very, very hazy. And this is the usual trabeculotomy being done. The tips for a trabeculotomy for a CTT is, one is, of course, where white meets blue. That's where the Schlemm's is. The other tip is that the sclera and the cornea are not the same curvature. So there is a little bit of a dip where the sclera ends and the cornea begins. And the third is the perforating vessels enter just at this level. So this is a CU. Can you see that? This is the congenital ectropion uvea, and it's very, very severe intractable glaucoma. So these are the ones where you have to tell the parents that you have a very, very bad glaucoma to start with, but we'll have to work very hard, which means more frequent EUAs, more stringent follow-up, and working a little harder than usual. So this is the trabecular block being cut in the CEU. All right. So where is the place of a glaucoma drainage device? We did publish our results with the ADI sometime back in the BJO. And these are the summary of pediatric glaucoma literature. So these were the various studies that I had, more than 90% at 1 year, 70 to 80% at 2 years, and 60 to 70% by 3 to 4 years. So there is an attrition. It does come down to about 3/4 by the time they're 5 years old, which is not very good because the children are going to grow further, but maybe we'll have better things to do when they grow up. So we've also recognized it's important, if you're going to jump into the bandwagon of childhood glaucoma, there are risks of repeated general anesthesia. There's cognitive decline, there's attention deficit, there's hyperactivity, there's deficient language processing. So all these things are noted, and these are very, very important for especially ROP as well as congenital glaucomas, because these are the two sets which are going to be subject to repeated general anesthesia. So we looked at that and considered sedation. If you want, you can look at this Journal of Glaucoma in October in 2020. So we've used this mucosal atomizer device, very, very useful. It's called MAD. It's by a company of Teleflex, costs just about 600 rupees. This attaches onto any 2 ml syringe. And this is Dexmed, dexmedetomidine. We use it now for all our postoperative sedations, or we don't do EUAs anymore. If the children are, the caveat is they don't do it in less than 6 months, because the brain is really, really underdeveloped and they are bothered about the excretion of the drug as well. So 6 months onwards, all our children now don't get EUAs anymore. They get examinations under Dexmed, and you can do the pressures, you can see the disc, you can do a corneal diameter, and believe me, that's all that I want, because the rest will be done by axial length and myopia, and I'll take a call on what to do with them. So having said that, I thought I just present what does vision actually in pediatric glaucoma look like, because the usual thinking is that it's a visually debilitating disorder. So this publication really looked at 133 eyes of 88 patients across the board of pediatric glaucomas. 36, about 1/3 was PCG, another third was about aphakia, 12% had anterior segment dysgenesis, and 12% had Sturge-Weber, and followed it up for 5 years. So in 46.6%, so that's close to half, had visual acuity of more than 20/70, which is good, which is driving visual acuity. And the PCG had the best, with almost 70% of better than 20/70 vision. And the factors most associated with less than 2200 vision were unilateral disease, multiple surgeries, poor vision and diagnosis. But the most common etiology for visual impairment was amblyopia. So this is something which we have to really, really remember, that after the surgery is done, the pressures are done, everything is done. But if you don't do refraction, if you don't do patching, and if you don't look for esotropias, exotropias, and this, that, and the other, your visual acuity is not going to be bad because of glaucoma, but you lose your vision because of amblyopia. So carrying this on, there is so much beyond the intraocular pressure. We are in the business of vision at the end of it. And even though we are doing childhood glaucoma, we can't be talking about pressures. We need to be talking about dikhta kaisa hai, what is the vision like? So sometimes if there's a persistent scar, like this baby had this persistent corneal scar, this was Peter's, she does require an OPK, and you need to push your cornea surgeons to get an OPK in. But sometimes an OPK is completely not possible. An iridectomy has worked very well, and here the UBM helps us. So the UBM in this baby shows a relatively okay anterior segment, and here the iris, and probably this is a lens with cataract also coming in. So I know that this is not going to have too much of a vision, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time and care on this, but I'm going to go all out on this eye. And this one with the large iridectomy, this child goes to school and has about 20/80 vision now. So she doesn't even need patching because the other eye is patched, but we hope that she's going to get better with that. Sometimes you have unilateral ophthalmos with high myopia, perfectly fine pressures, perfectly fine discs, but then your job is not done because the child doesn't see. So I've just captured this video to run concurrently. This is a child with an AGV, and it's very, very difficult for a contact lens to stick in a ophthalmic eye. So her father kept saying that you've given a contact lens, but it keeps popping out. So we kept on with it. We said, it's not popping out, it's not popping out. And lo and behold, in a minute, when we believed them, and there you see the contact lens has popped right out of her eye, and there it is. So there it is on the cheek. So this is what happens. And this has happened over 15 seconds in our clinic, isn't it? So if you're going to think that a high myope is going to be treated with a contact lens, it's not true. Sometimes this child actually had a refractive lens exchange, a clear lens extraction, if you please, and his IOL power was -4. So with a 22 diopter chashma, he's not going to see much. So there's nothing that you can do except that. And now we have one child where we've also had the refractive surgeons put in an ICL. So I think that will work better because I'm not comfortable with removing the lens in a small child. So let's see. But again, that ICL needs to be customized because these children have very, very large eyes because of the glaucoma. Remember, babies have a life. So this 2-day-old baby came to us, and right eye, you can see this Peters anomaly. When we were very, very scared when we saw this. And look at this Descemet's defect, this huge Descemet's defect, and the whole crystalline lens was incarcerated in the cornea. So in your heart of hearts, you knew that this eye is not going to have much vision, but then you want the pressures down. And we operated both eyes, landed up with left eye clearing well, but the right eye becoming an unsightly blind eye, even though the pressures were not too high, but this eye was never going to see, and the child didn't look well. So now we've started talking to the parents. We got this eviscerated with an ocular prosthesis, and the boy now has been enrolled into nursery. So remember, it's not all about the eye and not all about the pressures and either, but you have to know that this child has to hold your hand and walk through life, and you have to walk through with them. So to summarize, clinical examination is easily the hallmark of management for childhood glaucoma as for all others. And childhood glaucoma can manifest in myriad forms, multiple etiologies. So much is yet unknown. We learn every single day. And ensuring good vision is our goal, not IOP control. But remember, you need to hold these babies' hands lifelong. Thank you. Just sharing some pictures. This is a picture of a whole family of congenital glaucomas, and the parents are completely normal. And there are social issues as well. So if I can share this small story, that they had 3 girls, and these 2 have glaucoma. So this is her brother said, I'll take one, and he hoped to help them. And as luck would have it, this one is perfectly normal. She's fine, the one that he took. And they, of course, went ahead and were hungry for a boy. And this boy has the most severe glaucoma amongst all of them. So sometimes it's you know it's not done to play with destiny too much. And now all of them come together: the brother, the sister, the 4 children, because he's adopted her, but the one that he's adopted is normal. So that's luck. That's how it is. And here are 3 generations of blind. This grandfather, father, completely blind, have brought in their daughter, and they all have Axenfeld Rieger, and all of them have the same mutation on the FOXY1. So, and this is a brother duo, both of them, same mutation on the CYP1B1, same kind of childhood glaucoma. This fellow couldn't be done in time, so he is very, very poor vision. This young fellow is almost normal. So thank you, and hope for a journey in childhood glaucoma with all of you someday. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. We want to express our heartfelt gratitude for giving us time today and for explaining everything so lucidly. We that we can learn and start adopting some of these things slowly and really make a difference in somebody's life. These pictures are so
Yes.
inspiring. And I would invite a question from Dr. Menak if he's online.
I think you'll have to unmute.
Yeah, Menak, would you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Thank you, ma'am, for such an inspiring presentation. It's always so inspiring to hear from you and look at those small snippet, the videos. Ma'am, I would like to ask 2 questions. One, regarding what is the provision and future of genetic testing in India? Where are the centers where we can particularly look for genetic testing in these kind of families who are more susceptible to have PCG child? And secondly, Dr. Tamanash had an excellent video presentation. And just I would like to ask you that if at all that case of a failed trab and retrab in a child with PCG, what would be the next line of management for you? Would it be the same as in go for another tube shunt surgery, or would you try to attempt another trap or approach it some other way? Is there any alternative management that we can do in that case?
Okay, so coming to the first question of genetics, it's huge. I mean, the more we are learning about it, there is so much that can be done. For instance, you have a baby and uh, you test her, and then you test the father, and the father doesn't have the mutation, and then you tell him that probably there isn't so much risk in you as much as there is in the others, and you test the mother, and if it is not if it's a germline mutation, for instance, it doesn't need to come from them. You can tell them that this is just a one in a this thing whatever chance. So counseling is one. And on the other hand, you have a father who's normal, and you test him and he has a mutation, and then you know that, look, even though you're normal and you have a mutation and your wife has a mutation as well, and both of you are normal, but you could have an autosomal recessive CYP1B1 in the next baby. But having said that, all of that is into counseling. But when I looked at what presents to us, actually there are only about 8 or 9 genes which can be responsible for 90% of the children that we see. So CYP1B1, LTBP2, and TEC for primary congenital glaucoma, PITX2, FOXY1 for Peters and Axenfeld-Rieger, PAX6 for aniridia, FOXE3 for congenital primary aphakia, and that's it. So someday I hope we're going to have a gene panel for anterior segment dysgenesis or non-acquired glaucomas, which is going to be so simple. And next-gen sequencing has made it very easy. But if any of you are interested, 20,000 rupees is all it takes commercially to get an entire glaucoma gene panel of 19 genes. And it's hugely useful to know what next, right? So I think it's going to come in a huge way. And remember, anterior segment dysgenesis are so varied. I've had aniridia and Peters in one eye. I've had Peters in one eye, Axenfeld in the other. I've seen PCG in one eye, Peters in the other. So it's all such a mix. And genetics is what gives us so many answers. There's so many times. So I think it's going to come in a huge, huge way. It's a matter of us applying it. There's no point in saying that genetics will come. It's there. You have to catch hold of it and bring it into your practice. And believe you me, once you start understanding it, it will make you far better clinicians. You will now put a torch and you will know कि ये तो बच्चों PAX6 है, इसका Wilms tumor कराओ. So there will be a time when you do that, when you start seeing that. So genetics is really, really going to come in. As you have gray hair on your head, you become more and more conservative because you've done it and you've seen it all. So if I have a baby who's undergone 2 CTTs, we do a lot of DLCP under transillumination. It's especially for children. It's easy. You just put a torch. Maybe I should have put a slide of that. You just put a torch near the cornea, and there'll be a lucid area around the limbus, and then the dark area of the ciliary body starts. And once you start transilluminating, you will realize how many DLCPs in children you've done and only lasered that sclera and done nothing else. So the fact that DLCP does not work in children is not because it doesn't work in children, it's because you're not lasering the ciliary body. Your laser is not reaching the ciliary process. That's why it is so unpredictable in children. In adults, it's more predictable because the eye hasn't grown. You know, it's the same 1.5 mm behind the limbus where the ciliary body is. It's not so in children. The limbus is completely distorted. So now we've learned that I'd probably do a 180 degrees DLCP under transillumination. And only if that doesn't work and everything goes off, because tubes in children are a difficult ball game. There will be corneal problems, they will migrate, they will move, children will rub, there will be conjunctival retractions. So there are problems with tubes. But yes, when you're back against the wall, of course, I mean, left, right, and center, we put in lots and lots of them, and the babies are doing, and the children have grown, and they're doing well. They're grown up. Yeah. No question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, just wanted to know if you can shed some light on how has, like, COVID really impacted the congenital glaucoma management in some way. Are you like combining the EUAs with the surgeries, or like what are the precautions that you're taking apart from testing?
Yeah, so we've always combined EUA with surgery. We've never done EUA alone. So we've never wasted the GA. We've always assumed the diagnosis of congenital glaucoma, especially in small babies, is usually clinical. You can make out with the larger, with the axial length and steamy cornea and all that. But what has changed is we've started doing bilateral surgery.
Okay.
So rather than having them go and then come back and then be tested again and then all that, so bilateral surgery and reliance on axial length. We've learned that. So now all our children, all our files have the normal axial length growth curve. It's like a normal growth of a child. So we have a normal growth curve and it is plotted every time. So the axial length, the babies, we've learned that from the cataract surgeons. They just catch all of the babies and do an A scan. There's no big deal to it apparently. So we rely on the axial length and of course the refraction. And the third thing we do is start using the eye care. It was lying around, but we didn't use it so much. But now we've started relying on the eye care. Dr. Sirisha has published that as long as the logistic regression, they've shown that if the pressures are less than 90, that was a figure that statistically they found on the eye care, then it was in agreement with the Goldman or the Perkins. So if we have eye care pressures more than reaching 20, then we take the child up for an EUA. If the eye care pressures are 10, 12, which they usually are, and the axial length is within, we've stopped doing EUAs actually, which is such a bad thing. But there are some babies now who have operated in February and then the lockdown happened and all that, and they haven't had an EUA, but their vision. So we've relied more on axial length, refraction, and vision, and Cardiff visions, and we've made our pediatric ophthalmologists very, very busy. But the visions in these 1-year-old, 10-month-old children are at about 612 Cardiff, 618 Cardiff. So then, and the corneas are clear and the eye care pressures are normal. So the main thing is axial length, eye care pressures, bilateral surgery, hardly any EUA because there's no way, there's no place for an EUA now. Everything is so limited. Yeah.
Right. So I'm not feeling stupid for asking this question now. Given such a detailed response, earlier I was thinking that should I ask this or should I not?
No. Good. I
Yeah.
should have
So,
put all
ma'am,
that in.
next small thing was that you mentioned about intranasal dexmedetomidine. So, if I'm even pronouncing it correctly, so are you using it even for the kids with suspected syndromic presentations? Like
We are using
heart
it.
defect? Are you're excluding the heart defect cases? But apart from that, are you using it for kids with other syndromic issues also, like systemic features of syndromes, or excluding them?
We are using it only for post-op. We're not using it to diagnose. Everybody gets a full EUA,
Okay.
and only we operate them post-operatively. But sometimes the anesthetist is not comfortable with it, then we don't use it. But usually, I mean, if they give clearance for GA, then they have no problem with Dexmed. I mean,
Right.
on the other hand, that child would have had an EUA. So all of these children are PAC cleared. So all of them have to be by the anesthetist and it's under monitoring. It's not that it's just, you put it in and you see. They have the ECG electrodes, they have a pulse ox, and they are in the post-op recovery. So I didn't go into details of that, but they're in the post-op recovery and the anesthetist is around who's also seeing what is going on. The thing is we are not giving inhalational anesthesia and we're not taking them into the OR, but they're in their mother's laps. So they're very happy. They just sleep and we do our EUA in the mother's lap, and that is that. So it's just that. But everything else is prepared as for GA, and there are children who don't sleep enough, and they're taken in for GA then. They're on our list. So,
Right.
but they're very few and far between.
Your paper has a very high success rate.
Yeah, we're very happy. It has helped us not only in terms of the baby, but in terms of our operating time, OT time. So while I'm doing the surgery, my senior resident is doing Dexmet outside. So it's a value addition.
I'm just following up on Menak's question. Where would you send these kids for the cost part aside, the genetic testing? For benefit of everybody who's listening or tuning
most
in.
children can't get it done. Those who do, we have, I have the good fortune of working in PGI. So we send them to the genetics department, and the pediatrician who takes care of our children is a DM in medical genetics as well. So and she runs the genetics lab. We send the children over, they get both systemic workup and the parents get a genetic counseling. And once a week they have nothing financial, but there's this chap who comes from a company called Med Genomics, and they're very good. So they are the ones who have panels for every disease. So you can just Google it. It's Med Genomics, and they're in every city in India. Apparently, I'm sure you can just call them up and they'll come to you. Right. But for the glaucoma panel, they have identified it themselves that whatever genes are found. So they can't customize, or maybe they can, I don't know. But we've asked for just the glaucoma gene panel. I haven't really spoken to them so much, but it costs about 19,000 for a glaucoma gene panel, which I think is good. I mean, 19,000 rupees for 18, 19 odd genes completely, and they give a very detailed, nice report. So they come, so we have that advantage. But if anybody wants to, they're apparently very amenable to talk to and come and set it up for you. And I'm sure it can be customizable. You can say that I want just this, how much will it cost? And I'm sure they can do that.
So thank you so much, ma'am. Aarti, are you there?
Logged out. She's
facing some network issues.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to announce regarding the next session of Surfing the Anterior segment, which would be held on 27th of December. And the last date for submitting the cases for this particular session is 17th of December. Aarti, would you like to display she's there. Yeah, Aarti, would you like
yes.
to
I'm very sorry. I think there's some issue with my laptop. It has just crashed. So I won't be able to show the flyer, but we'll share it soon on the Facebook.
Yeah, okay. So
the theme of the next session is pediatric ophthalmology, strabismus.
Okay. So I would once again like to thank Professor Sushmita Kaushik ma'am for sparing time so justly for Young Ophthalmology Society. She's traveled all the way from Delhi and attended the Glaucoma Summit and also given to Team Yossi's venture. And I hope that the generation of ophthalmology that is watching this right now will be benefiting hugely from this. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again. And thank you to our panelists, Dr. Monica and Dr. Tamunash for his excellent case, Dr. Menak and Team Yossi. Extremely grateful to all the viewers who have been present here and made the program a success. Hope that it is uploaded on YouTube soon. Thank you so much. Any final comments?
No, thank you. Thank you everyone for making the discussion so interesting. And the session was really interesting and useful for all of us. Thank you. See you for the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.